There are doors in this world that don't have signs on them. Rooms where decisions are made before the public ever hears about them. And for over 300 years, certain men have known exactly how to find those rooms. Not through wealth alone. Not through birthright. But through a handshake. In 1947, a man named Jim Shaw reached the pinnacle of Freemasonry in America. He became a 33rd-degree Scottish Rite Mason, one of the highest honors in the fraternity. For decades, he moved through circles most people never even knew existed. And then, in 1988, he walked away. What he revealed wasn't about rituals or symbols or secret oaths. It was about something far more practical. Access. Let me tell you what that actually means. When Benjamin Franklin traveled to France in 1776, America was losing the Revolutionary War. The colonies were broke, disorganized, and desperate for help. Franklin was 70 years old, unknown to French royalty, and represented a rebellion most European powers saw as doomed. And yet, within months, he secured French military support, millions in loans, and a treaty that changed the course of history. How? He was a Freemason. And so were the men who mattered in Paris. This wasn't luck. It wasn't charisma. It was recognition. In the French lodges, Franklin was already known. His reputation had traveled ahead of him, not through newspapers, but through correspondence between brothers. Letters of introduction. Quiet endorsements from men in London, Philadelphia, Edinburgh. When he arrived, he didn't need to prove himself. He was already trusted. That's the first advantage most people miss. Freemasons didn't just build networks. They built trust systems that operated across borders, across languages, across wars. In a world where information moved slowly and reputations were everything, that was power. Let's go further back. In 18th century England, if you wanted to open a business, you needed credit. But credit didn't come from banks the way it does now. It came from reputation. From references. From men who would vouch for your character. If you were a Mason, you had those men. Not because they owed you. But because you'd sat in the same lodge. Shared the same rituals. Proven, over months or years, that you were reliable. When a brother vouched for you, it meant something. And when contracts were signed, when partnerships were formed, when opportunities appeared, Masons were often first in line. This wasn't written down. It didn't need to be. Jim Shaw described it simply in his later interviews. He said that being a 33rd degree Mason meant you were known. Not famous. Known. When he traveled, there were always people who could help. Lawyers who took his calls. Businessmen who made introductions. Judges who remembered his name. Not because of corruption. Because of connection. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In the 1800s, Freemasonry was deeply embedded in the American legal system. Many judges, sheriffs, and prosecutors were Masons. So were many defense attorneys. If you were a Mason accused of a crime, and your judge was a Mason, would that matter? Legally, no. Ethically, perhaps not. But psychologically? There's a reason the anti-Masonic party formed in 1828. The public had started to notice patterns. Men who should have been convicted, weren't. Men who should have been ruined, survived. And too often, they wore the same ring. William Morgan knew this firsthand. In 1826, Morgan was a Mason in New York who threatened to publish the fraternity's secrets. He wasn't talking about mysticism. He was talking about influence. He disappeared. His body was later found in the Niagara River. Multiple Masons were arrested. But the trials were unusual. Witnesses changed their stories. Judges recused themselves. Sentences were light. The Masons involved walked free. And the message was clear: some men are protected in ways others are not. Now, let's talk about the presidency. 14 U.S. presidents have been Freemasons. Washington. Monroe. Both Roosevelts. Truman. Ford. That's not a conspiracy. It's a documented fact. But here's the part that doesn't get discussed. These men didn't just happen to be Masons. They rose through the ranks while surrounded by other Masons, donors, advisors, power brokers, publishers. When Truman made decisions about post-war Europe, several of his key advisors were brothers. When Franklin Roosevelt shaped the New Deal, his inner circle was filled with men from the same lodges. Did Freemasonry decide policy? No. But did it shape the rooms where policy was made? Absolutely. Access doesn't announce itself. It simply appears when you need it. Jim Shaw talked about something else, too. Something quieter. He said that once you reached the higher degrees, you started to see how the world actually worked. Not through elections. Not through protests. Through private meetings. Through men who knew men who knew men. He described attending events where governors, senators, and business leaders gathered, not for publicity, but for conversation. These weren't conspiracies. They were networks. And if you weren't in the network, you simply weren't in the conversation. Let's bring this closer to home. In the early 20th century, if you wanted to become a police chief in many American cities, it helped to be a Mason. If you wanted a judgeship, it helped to be a Mason. If you wanted a loan to start a business, a promotion in a company, or a recommendation to a university, it helped to be a Mason. Not because of rules. Because of relationships. Because when two men shared a bond forged over years of ritual, trust, and mutual obligation, that bond mattered more than a resume. This is what Shaw ultimately walked away from. Not because he uncovered some dark conspiracy. But because he realized that the fraternity's real power wasn't spiritual. It was social. And it had been for centuries. Here's the truth most people never confront. The world has always been run by networks. Freemasonry simply built one of the most effective networks in history. They didn't need to control governments. They were already friends with the men who did. They didn't need to rig the system. They'd helped build it. And the advantages they gained, access, trust, opportunity, were invisible to everyone outside the lodge. There's a reason Freemasonry still exists in almost every country on earth. Not because of rituals. Because it works. If you're a Mason in London and you travel to Johannesburg, you can find a lodge. Introduce yourself. And within days, you'll know people. Real people. Influential people. Try doing that as an outsider. Shaw spent the last years of his life trying to explain what he'd seen. Not to attack Freemasonry. But to reveal a simple, uncomfortable fact. Some people navigate the world with maps most of us don't even know exist. And for 300 years, Freemasons have been drawing those maps for each other. So when you see a man with a Masonic ring, understand what it represents. Not magic. Not secrecy. But a system of trust, built over lifetimes, connecting men across industries, borders, and generations. A system that opens doors most people don't even see. And keeps them closed to everyone else. You can join Freemasonry, of course. The lodges are still open. But by the time you reach the degrees that matter, if you ever do, the men who've been there for decades will already be 10 steps ahead. Because that's how the network works. It always has been.